Onward, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today for our panel event called Green Shoots: How can we best prepare the workforce for a net zero future? So the energy crisis has brought the UK's domestic energy production to the forefront of the political agenda, with a big push from the new BEIS Secretary of State and the Chancellor, amongst others, to increase our domestic energy supply. So that could be through technologies like hydrogen, offshore wind, nuclear, solar, and so on, which will help the UK cut carbon emissions and reach net zero, and also boost our energy security. So on net zero, industry and policymakers are looking to use the transition as a tool to support not only energy security, but also economic growth and to create jobs in some of the least productive areas of the country through the levelling up agenda. If we're going to meet our target for net zero by 2050, we will need to develop a workforce with the right green skills, which will be vital for a green transition, not only to ensure that those green industries can be fully staffed and also that we get the jobs in the UK, but also to unlock the potential of some of those areas that are not performing so well economically. And we're already seeing some green shoots in places like Humberside, Teesside, and in the West Midlands. Hopefully we're about to see a huge transition towards electric vehicle manufacturing jobs as well. So we'll be asking today, what will these new green jobs look like? What sort of skills will be in demand? And how does the current workforce shape up? And then finally, what levers does the government have at its disposal to support that reshaping of the workforce and the UK's industrial landscape? Some quick stats on the scale of the challenge. Today there are around 30,000 people employed in the UK's offshore wind industry. By 2030 that could rise to around 100,000. And then on heat pumps there are around 1,200 qualified installers in 2021, but by 2030 that might need to get up to around 20,000. So a huge challenge there, but obviously a lot of transferable skills from other people in the industry. So today what's going to happen is we're going to hear from each of our speakers for some introductory remarks, and then we'll have a panel discussion and Q&A with the audience. And I'm delighted to introduce our panel. So we have Anne-Marie Trevelyan MP, Secretary of State for Transport, who was appointed on the 6th of September 2022, so nearly a month into the job, but previously Secretary of State for International Trade, and also worked as a minister in BEIS as well, so abreast a lot of the energy and transport decarbonisation issues that we'll be discussing today. We've got Virginia Crosby MP, Member of Parliament for Unismore.
Fantastic.
There we go. Ashley wrote it down for me. So previously a PPS in the Department for Health and Social Care, and also in the Office of the Secretary of State for Wales, and a big advocate for nuclear energy along with a number of her colleagues.
That's the understatement of the century, I would say.
And we also have Steph Spiro, political correspondent and environment editor at the Daily Express, where she's worked since 2019 and has just been shortlisted as one of the top 30 reporters under 30 by MHP Mischief, and we've been following your work with interest over the last few years. And then finally, Michelle Hubert, who's Head of Public Affairs and Policy at National Grid, where she's worked since 2018, and before that she worked at the CBI for 10 years, including as Head of Energy and Climate Change. And Onward is delighted to be partnering with National Grid to put on this event today. So enough from me, and I'd just like to hear from our speakers how they see these challenges and green skills, and over to Anne-Marie first.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Morning everyone. I hope your first night of conference hasn't made you too jaded. Bourbon cups of tea in hand, always a good way to start the day. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Ed said, I was the Energy Minister. I was the Minister who put the Net Zero strategy together and forced the whole of Whitehall to get their heads around what that meant. We then went to COP and the whole world went, oh my God, how have you done this? It was fascinating. We have got a model and a programme that we're rolling out at the UK, which is genuinely world leading at every single level. There is a really long way to go. It's a really hard journey of transition. It's a massive industrial transition that we are asking every part of our system to do. But I would open by saying we are genuinely world leading. And the key for me, and having set the strategy and then become Secretary of State for International Trade, we have the opportunity to harness the value of all our hard work, all our incredible innovation, and the discoveries and the demonstration of how this is done at scale to the rest of the world, and ensure that not only is the UK's way of doing things the way that we set the standard across the world as we try to meet the decarbonisation challenge, but that we see that value to the UK. So when the Prime Minister talks about growth, this is absolutely at the heart of how we do that, not only by providing cheap, clean energy, which is one of the key underpinning elements to enable growth across the piece, but this in itself is an incredibly important area of growth for us, and we need to get that right. I now have the pleasure to discuss being the Transport Secretary who has to enact the decarbonisation plan, which I kicked Grant regularly to force the Department of Transport to put out. So perhaps that's, it's my own comeuppance. It's a fascinating problem. Nearly 30% of all our emissions come from our transport modes, various. So it is a huge transition. Of course, we are leading the way on net zero emissions vehicles. Again, we've done that by setting the right lever in a very conservative way. We've said this is what we are going to do. Industry, investment, pay attention. We expect you to lead the way. And we have seen that coming through. As Ed says, we are now seeing how the UK is harnessing the value of that in the battery technologies and building the gigafactories that we want. And those are the sort of policy anchors, if you like, that we've set in place to allow that inward investment to grow. But none of this will be possible unless we grow the number of skilled technicians across the piece in every form of engineering, from hard-end welders who can do brilliant things in nuclear power stations through to software engineers who help design and indeed fix our EV cars as and when this is what we all drive. It is an enormous challenge across the skills piece. One of the things we did to really kickstart this agenda and shake ourselves down to think about it was to run the Green Skills Task Force as we were putting the Net Zero strategy together, to really try and test ourselves in every key kind of area of business across the UK and what that might look like. The numbers were fairly startling and quite challenging to get our heads around. And I think it was a really useful way to kickstart every part of the machine to think about it. I think we all know that if we don't start talking to children in year 8 and 9 about why, when they're interested in, saving the whale or some other, wonderful idealistic vision that they have of something around nature that should be, what that means is do STEM, make sure you don't give up on maths, work your way through. When you get to your leaving school point, there is going to be a plethora of choices that takes you into any number of industrial arenas where you will literally be part of the solution by ensuring that we are building and maintaining and running a whole series of activities that are based on those clean energy resources. And indeed, I think what we will see moving forwards is that wider sustainability challenge, which we are testing ourselves on, and again, be really proud the UK is world leading in so many of those areas. So I've now got the fantastic challenge of doing that across all the transport modes, and I want to take it to your challenge, Ed, to something that is much more akin to a national endeavour. Not only that, a big business, I don't know, let's take BAE Systems, that builds ships and planes, needs loads of engineers of all descriptions. They have set up fantastic academies. They are growing their own people so that they've got a pipeline of skilled young people for the next 30 years. But that's not enough. What we need is for them to grow twice as many, some of whom will go somewhere else, because the SMEs, who will be the large companies of the future, simply cannot afford nor have the resource to do that growth themselves. So I want to try and drive, and I think transport is such an important area, to harness from school right through to FE colleges, and how we link up these high-end skilled academies so that all our young people, wherever they are across the UK, and I think that's really important, can tap into these areas of skills development, working either in local businesses as apprentices as they build those basic skill sets within this industrial revolution skill base, or indeed where they can then go to where there are the big primes who are leading the way from the oil and gas sectors, driving across to offshore wind, right through to the maritime activities down in Plymouth, who are going to be building the ships that get out to our offshore wind alongside the clean maritime. 6% of the world's shipping emissions are from shipping. Huge amounts of work in so many areas of this. The work on sustainable aviation fuels requires a whole series of new skill sets, and of course always remembering that it's really exciting to build the shiny new thing that has all the shiny new kit that does it in a new way. The maintenance and support for 30 years is where the jobs and the value actually sits in the long term. So we have an enormous both opportunity and challenge, and my challenge to everyone in our sector, which reaches across is we have to do this as a national endeavour. So my mission in the next couple of years is to create a fabric, a network, a spider's web that allows that to be genuinely possible, whether you live in Berwick or Plymouth, whether you want to be a marine engineer or a car mechanic of the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me this morning. Borodar, good morning. Aelod Senathol, Ynys Môn Dwi. I'm the Member of Parliament for Ynys Môn, which I personally believe is the best constituency in the UK. Now, this all comes back to really why was I elected? I hadn't really been to Ynys Môn before. They hadn't had a Conservative for 32 years. They hadn't had a woman for 70 years. It's applied council, applied MS. There isn't one Conservative Member of Parliament. At the count, you're allowed 12 guests. I didn't know 12 people on the island to invite, but I got elected. Why? Because I was the only candidate that was advocating the new nuclear at Wilver. And this is a big nuclear power station that is currently being decommissioned. My father actually worked there, and he had to leave Wales. He had to leave Wales to find work, which is why I and my siblings have this terrible English accent, according to him. So I was elected because I offered hope. I offered hope for the young people on the island. They have to leave the island in order to find work. I went to Hinckley recently, and a couple of people from the island came up to me and they said, Virginia, we have to live and work 6 hours away from our home, away from our community, away from our families, away from our Welsh language in order to find good employment. On the island, it's very, the whole sort of hospitality and tourism sector is very, very important. But what I'm trying to do is develop these other sectors. It used to be known as Mon Mam Cymru, which in Welsh means Mother of Wales, because it was so very green and very verdant. The whole farming community was very important. And we used to feed the whole of Wales. And now we're known as Energy Island. Why? Because I've got wind, wave, solar, hydrogen, I've got tidal, and if I've got anything to do with it, large-scale nuclear. And so what I would hope to do is to feed Wales in another way now, and actually to feed Wales by providing energy and a bit of England if we're feeling a little bit generous. So I've been trying to do something about it. I chair the Nuclear Delivery Group, I chair the APPG on SMRs, and I've been shouting about nuclear at every single opportunity, as Anne-Marie will testify. When I stood up in the 1922 recently to talk to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, all of the other MPs actually shouted Wilver. So I sort of feel I'm definitely doing my bit. My annual report. So this goes out to as MPs we produce an annual report. This goes out to over 50,000 businesses and individuals across the island. It's actually going out this week. This is me in front of the old Wilver, and we're hoping to put a new Wilver next door. This will mean 8,000 construction jobs and 800 to 900 steady state jobs. These are really, really good jobs. And the significance of nuclear is it's generations of employment. It's actually the construction time. It's actually the teams working on it, and then it's the decommissioning. So what you see are families and communities that are vested in the nuclear sector. And so this session is really about skills. So for me, it's about young people. And I want to get young people excited about nuclear, a bit excited about the jobs that it entails. I'm doing a big Anglesey Day in Westminster on the 31st of October. And historically, it's always been about the island food and the sort of the dancing and the language. But what I'm actually doing is trying to get young people to come to Westminster and actually think, do you know what, there's some really, really good careers in here. We almost need to have a commitment with our young people that we will provide the jobs for you, but your bit of the equation is you need to go to college and actually study and actually get the skill set so that we can actually deliver nuclear, not only for the UK, but this is a great export for us. If you see what Rolls-Royce are doing with their SMRs, this is a really fantastic opportunity for us to once again get back into a sector that we were leading and we were dominating in the 50s and the 60s. We've got everything. We've got all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. We've got the fuel. We've got the small modular reactors. We've got AMRs. We've got SMRs. We're looking at in terms of STEP. We're looking at in terms of fusion. And what we need to do is bring all those pieces of the jigsaw together, and that is what the UK government is doing. We've got the British Energy Security Strategy, we've got Great British Nuclear, which we should be hearing from soon, and that's actually headed up by a Welshman, very proud about that, Simon Bowen. And we're putting all these pieces together. We've got the nuclear financing bill that went ahead in Q2, looking at the RAB, the Regulated Asset financing model. We launched the Future Nuclear Enabling Fund, which is a £120 million fund, which was launched on the island by the Secretary of State for BEIS. And the one thing I'm pushing for at the moment is green taxonomy for nuclear. Why? Because that will actually bring all of those pension fund monies and that private equity into the nuclear sector. We've got green taxonomy for solar, we've got green taxonomy for wind. We need to be able to compete on a global basis. They've got green taxonomy for nuclear in Europe, they've got green taxonomy for nuclear in Canada. So I'm really, really pushing for that. And I think for me, that's the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle to make sure we can get nuclear in place. So I'd like to end by saying my mission is all about jobs for our young people on Anglesey. When I go around the island, they want to be able to afford their own home, they want to be able to stay in their community and keep the Welsh language alive. I'm doing everything I can in my power to make sure I can deliver new nuclear on Ynys Môn. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. Plenty to come back on there in a second. So, Steph.
Morning, thanks for having me. So I get to speak to people in green and brown jobs all the time, especially as part of the paper's Daily Express Green Britain Needs You campaign. And I think what we're talking about here is all in that name. Green Britain needs you. The net zero future depends on every person in every role doing their bit to decarbonise the country. And as my inbox will know, tons of polls are around, and they all say that I think the average is 3/4 of people want to play their part in reaching net zero. So I think the government and businesses have an incredible opportunity to tap into this enthusiasm and pave the way for a net zero future. So if we have the passion and the drive, we need to ensure, as the panel said, that we have the skills too. So as Anne-Marie mentioned, there is a shortage, for instance, with insulation technicians and heat pump installers and battery engineers. So if we are going to get to net zero by 2050, we need to make sure that people are retained and retrained so we have more people in those roles. But it's also going to mean taking traditionally jobs that you might not think as being as obviously green and upskilling people there too. So for instance, carbon accountants. If businesses are going to reduce their emissions, they need to be able to know how many emissions they're emitting in the first place. Geologists are going to play their part, because if we're developing carbon capture technology, we need someone with a solid understanding of the ground. And even chemists, because if you're going to get rid of pollutants, you need someone that understands the elements. It's also a numbers game. So on the one side of the spectrum, there's a retirement crunch. So people over 50 are exiting industry in droves. And that's a shame because there's a brain drain. As Ed mentioned, there's people in carbon-intensive industries that have transferable skills that apply to the renewable sector. But they are leaving en masse, and that was exacerbated by the pandemic. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And as Anne-Marie mentioned, on the other side of the spectrum, there is a limited pipeline of youngsters coming in with STEM qualifications, such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So that's things that need to be addressed. But also, there is hope. There's so much that government and businesses can do. And I think it's important to say that getting to net zero by 2050 is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. So we need to ensure that we have the jobs for 10, 20, 30 years' time. And again, as Anne-Marie said, education is going to be key. We need to make sure that the environment is at the heart of national curriculum, A-levels, T-levels, apprenticeships, so that no matter what role people go into, they're viewing the world with green tinted lenses and ensuring that they have the environment front of mind. Net zero academies is another option. Funding those PhDs for those acute high-level jobs, and also incentivizing businesses to do their part and retrain and upskill their employees, so maybe tax reductions, dare I say. So there's lots that can be done, and there definitely is hope. I think the media have a role to play here too. We have a huge part in shaping the public's opinion on climate change, And where things are going right with green jobs, we should raise awareness and promote those measures, and also scrutinise where scrutiny is due and things aren't going to plan. And I think Chris Skidmore's net zero review, which the findings should come out in 3 months' time, will probably pave the way for the next stage of Britain's green industrial revolution and lay out how we can get there whilst ensuring economic growth and energy security. So there's lots to be excited about.
Great, thank you, Steph. And Michelle.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, really delighted to be here and to support this event. For those of you that don't know National Grid, we run the energy networks that get the energy from where it's produced in the country to where it's needed. So we occupy quite a unique place in the system. I think I'd probably say at the moment we're in a bit of an inflection point in energy. So we're kind of at the point where all 3 points of the trilemma, so security of supply, affordability and decarbonisation are kind of all in sharp focus all at the same time. And I think just thinking beyond the kind of short term, thinking ahead and in the context of today's discussion on green jobs and skills, I think there are probably 3 points that I'd kind of focus on. First is around accelerating investment. So we very much believe that the clean energy transition provides the clearest route to long-term security of supply, resilience and affordability. So really great to hear the government's commitment to clean technologies like nuclear, like offshore wind, like electric vehicles. That's all fantastic. That basically requires industry to invest at quite a considerable pace. So if you take offshore wind, for example, over the last decade or so, the UK has delivered around 10 gigawatts of offshore wind. We've now got about 8 years to deliver the next 40 gigawatts. So the scale of the challenge is absolutely massive. And from our perspective, that means investing in a lot more onshore and offshore networks so that the energy can get connected to the grid and can reach people's homes. So it's really critical that decisions are made quickly and we get the right regulatory and policy framework in place so that we and the supply chain are able to kind of deliver those investments at the pace required, but really critically to kind of capture those benefits and those opportunities. So that means things like setting the right regulatory framework for investment ahead of need so that we can get the network infrastructure in place when the offshore wind farms want to connect. It means things like speeding up the planning regime, which the government is committed to doing, which is excellent, and making sure that we are ensuring that the benefits are there for those communities that want to that need to host the infrastructure that's going in. It also means getting the policy frameworks right for those technologies that are more on a more kind of more innovative scale. Things Steph mentioned around carbon capture and storage, and things like multi-purpose interconnectors, which can connect up clusters of wind farms to 2 countries at once. These are all kind of on the new end of the scale, need newer regulatory frameworks in order to deliver that investment. That kind of brings me to the second point, which is squarely on the kind of focus of today around green jobs opportunity. If we get that right, there is a massive, massive opportunity for developing that kind of homegrown skilled workforce. So just to illustrate the point, so we published a report back in 2020 which said that to meet net zero, the energy industry would need to recruit for around 400,000 jobs by 2050. Around 120,000 of those would be by 2030. So those roles will be spread right across the country, kind of every region, every nation. So there's a massive, massive opportunity to kind of get those, tackle some of those regional inequalities. I guess that's the kind of size of the prize. The flip side of that, from the kind of energy sector perspective, and Steph's touched on some of it, we do face quite a significant skills challenge. So things like competition from other sectors, diminishing pipeline of STEM skills coming through, but also a major diversity challenge as well. So given the kind of sheer number of jobs coming down the line, we're not going to be able to meet net zero and kind of meet that challenge without attracting people into the sector that wouldn't have otherwise thought of coming in. So diversity is going to play a massive part of that. So that means that alongside kind of that focus on driving investment, we need to focus on getting a net zero skills strategy in place, building on the Green Jobs Task Force that was done last year and the recommendations in that. And that needs to think kind of nationally, regionally and locally to make sure we are maximising the benefits. And my final point then is around, this isn't, what kind of can an industry be doing? This isn't something that we kind of think the onus is on government. It's absolutely for industry to step up and deliver and ensure that we are kind of developing that skills pipeline. So just as an example, at National Grid, we're committed to developing the skills of the future by focusing on those with lower income communities, so providing skills development for 45,000 people by 2030. And to do that, we've set up a programme for 16 to 25-year-olds, offering a whole range of activities things like career mentoring, work experience, access to apprenticeships, internships within National Grid. And the focus really is about connecting those in more overlooked communities with those kind of skills opportunities with that career development. So I think the point I can really leave on is, there's a massive need to deliver at pace to drive the investment needed that's going to create the jobs in the net zero transition. But I think secondly, we have to focus on collaboration across industry, the regulator and government in order to really maximise that benefits and that opportunity. So it's a kind of step change in delivery, but it's also a step change in mindset as well.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So we have about 35 minutes left. I might use the next 10 minutes to fire sort of quick fire questions at the panel and then come to the audience. So Anne-Marie, maybe I could come to you first. So you talked about the fact that actually the reason why we worry about jobs and green jobs in particular is not just about decarbonisation, it's also about the economic benefit. And that means we need to get the factories in the UK. So the cable factories, the offshore wind farm factories, the battery gigafactories and things like that. How do you think we're going on that? And are you concerned perhaps that the EU, for example, countries there are offering bigger subsidies and they may be stealing a march on us there?
So that's a fair challenge. I'm not sure that they're stealing a march. Everyone's got to get this investment. We're building whole new industries, so we need, everyone's got to play their part. We've driven some really strong, initial investments, government investments, and drawing in with investment we've seen over the last year. And actually, as Secretary of State for Trade, we hosted the Global Investment Summit last October, and where we have now, at the time, about £10 billion worth of commitments there. Since then, another 40 billion going into a number of sectors where those clean energy outputs were the key. So we are seeing huge inward investment coming into the UK to underwrite that UK government support and direction of travel. So it's a combination of the two, and we're doing well, but there's much more to do. And I think the challenge of this is we've got to keep going at this pace for quite a long time. This is really hard to sustain, and we shouldn't be under any illusions that, COVID was I don't mean this flippantly, a distraction in the sense that it absorbed a huge amount of process time, of civil servant time, of policy time. The realities of every time there's a bump in the road, because that's how life is, and we have to try and keep going with this big overarching plan. It's hard, so we have to maintain a level of discipline and focus on it, which I think, interesting to your point, Steph, the general public are with us now, and this is really interesting. When we brought the Climate Change Act in 2008, and those early sort of easy wins around carbon budgets 1 and 2, where we were finding that low-hanging fruit to change how we did business, was relatively straightforward to do, and sort of broke everyone in gently to what this big industrial challenge is. Now it's very clear, it's right in front of us. We're seeing, in terms of the impacts of climate change, of the weather patterns, of the need for those most vulnerable countries to have support. We're seeing that now, so we can't stop. Even if we fix the carbon emissions today, we've got 100 years of disrupted weather patterns. So we have to keep going to find those solutions so that we at least keep up with the pace of change. That's what's actually the hardest to do, and actually maintaining what the Office for Investment, which Boris Johnson set up, that driving force of inward investment, where pension funds from around the world want to invest in the UK because they genuinely know that we're absolutely rock steady on this, and we keep pushing forwards is key. How we get there, the path that we will move at, will slightly depend on, some sectors might get there quite quickly. You look at solar, it doesn't require a subsidy anymore because there was this huge push, it made sense, people invested, it's now a commercially viable proposition in itself. So it's the government's role to help get to that point in each constituent part, but I think really importantly, making sure that we build that skills pipeline, that skills enterprise piece, which actually, for my money, is, you'll not hear me say this very often, something the French do really well in the nuclear space. My mother's French, it's a sort of ongoing here, but actually, you do 20 years in the French Navy as a nuclear engineer, and then you're guaranteed a job with EDF for the rest of your career. That sort of relationship between your commitment to being in this space and our commitment to ensuring you have a great career is one that I think we have got to take on very seriously, because this is a vast area where we need to shift our number of STEM workforce, which looks different. I mean, it's vast what that means in practice, but we have to make that the centre of everything we do. So that's where our challenge lies. But the underwriting of it is if we get the inward investment, the taxpayer isn't the only one having to foot the bill.
Okay, and I wonder whether there might be a shift in mindset between the Boris Johnson government and the Liz Truss government, and that actually the Boris Johnson government was quite interventionist in terms of co-investing in factories and things like that. They were offering direct financial support. And the new government's talking about investment zones, which seem to be a more technology agnostic and industry agnostic approach. So do you think there'll be the same appetite to go in and make those bespoke deals with investors, or do you think that the new government wants to be a bit more sort of industry agnostic and just set the taxes and use that the way to attract the investors?
Two different things. Investment zones can be any number of things for getting infrastructure, housing, all sorts of things built in an area where you've got a community that wants to see that wants to see some of the stranglehold of the slowness of our planning system stripped away so they can get on and do something. So that could be a gigafactory, it could be a new town, it could be any number of those things in between, which is probably the perfect combination. So you've got a short travel to work area. So those are very much for communities who want to do something in their area, can see that opportunity. So those will have a complete mix and they'll be across the country. The reality is that if you want to be doing CCUS, you've got to do it somewhere where you've got somewhere where you can capture. So there are some big chunks of on the energy production side that have required, and we've just started that journey, we'll continue to require that support and that co-investing between government and big industry to do that. But more widely, as we move to those next stages, how do you, what does the car mechanic at the end of your road look like? That whole new industry that develops as we train and build new systems and ways of working so that those businesses can grow will be at small scale in volume. So there are so many different layers to this, but I think at the big scale end, the nuclear end, I say this, I can now say this with confidence. I had spent a long time looking to it going, we're working on it. We've worked on it, it's there, the Nuclear Financing Act is in place, we have the ability to draw in external investment alongside the government's commitments. Those sorts of big scale energy producers require both. So it's going to be a mixture, but actually the investment zones are, well, I remember them. I remember the Northern Development Corporation in Gateshead. Those of you old enough will remember it was a radical policy by Mrs Thatcher, who said there's a bit of really horrible land here, but you know what, if anyone wants to have it, we'll strip away the planning restrictions, help yourselves industry. And John Hall and a consortium of people came in and spent 10 years decontaminating it. But no one was on their backs, they were able to just get on and do it, and it's now one of the most thriving communities in the northeast. So that sort of, if you're up for it, you guys locally, who's perhaps says that's what the investment zone is about, or it says you want to have a new town within your constituency, or it's industrial. So it can be all sorts of things. On the big stuff, that'll be government will continue to have to underwrite that.
Okay, great. Maybe that segues us nicely to nuclear, with the government underwriting and potentially owning as well. So I guess with nuclear, do you think that it is actually the skills that's the bottleneck, or is it actually that investment piece and the government investment that is holding us back?
I think it's both actually, and I think if we can look at where we are now, we've got all but one of our nuclear power stations are coming offline in the next year, all but one, and it's really where are those people that are actually working in this nuclear sector, where are they going to go? And one of the issues we've had with cost. Really, we haven't actually had a strategy. We haven't had a strategy for decades. And I think what the great thing about the UK government is they've acknowledged that we are actually coming up with a strategy. And if you look at the whole fleet mentality, if we can take a group of key workers that are working on one nuclear power station, then go to another and another, this is what we actually need to do to get people to commit to coming into the sector. But also that has huge ramifications for cost. And if you see what happened in the solar sector, we were looking about 140 megawatt an hour. Now it's right the way down to sort of 40 megawatt hour. And if you look at the contract that we've actually got with Hinkley,